In the beginning, God created for 6 days and then rested on the seventh. Right at the start of the Bible, the number 7 is identified with something being finished or complete. Again and again throughout Scripture, the number 7 is used to denote this completeness or even divine perfection. Noah is told to place 7 pairs of each clean animal into the ark, and he knew that the flood was over after waiting 7 days once a dove returned with a leaf in its beak. In Exodus, we read of the command for animals to be at least 7 days old before being used for sacrifice. 2 Kings contains the command for the leprous Naaman to bathe in the Jordan River 7 times, and the command for Joshua to march around Jericho for 7 days and for 7 priests to blow 7 trumpets outside the city walls. Deuteronomy tells us that on every 7th year, the Israelites were to cancel all the debts they had made to each other and to free their slaves. The Lord's Prayer contains 7 petitions. In the book of Revelation, there are 7 churches, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls. In John's Gospel, Jesus uses 7 metaphors to describe himself: the bread, the gate, the light, the life, the truth, the vine, and the good shepherd. That's 7. Appearing over 700 times throughout both the Old and New Testaments, in biblical numerology, the number 7 represents completion or perfection. It denotes that a divine mandate has been fulfilled. Again and again, the number 7 represents perfection. And if this is the case, if this is true, if 7 is such a significant number, dripping with divine intention, then why? Why, we are left to wonder, why in the 1 Samuel text that Melanie read for us did God not anoint one of the 7 sons of Jesse presented to Samuel? Why did God choose David, the 8th child, to be king? If the criteria is not perfection, then what is? Some context may be helpful here. Earlier in 1 Samuel, we find the story of how the Israelites, looking at their neighboring nations in envy and fear, demanded of God that they have a king to rule over them. Through the prophet Samuel, God tries to dissuade the people, dealing how it will be for them under a king. The king, God says, will conscribe your young men to fight in his army and to drive his chariots. Your daughters will become his cooks and bakers and perfumers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards, and you will be forced to plow his land and take up his harvest. So essentially, he's going to enslave you and take all your stuff. To which the people say, yep, sign us up for that. Actually, they say, quote, "We are determined to have a king over us so that we also may be like other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." Looking at the challenges they face individually and as a nation, they say, "We want a strong man, a patriot, to go out and fight our battles for us." With their kingly criteria in mind, the people pick their perfect candidate. They pick Saul, tall, handsome, the favored son of a wealthy family. Saul was the kind of person the world teaches people to look up to. The regal, armor-clad aristocrat with high cheekbones and perfectly coiffed hair. He just looked the part. So the people anointed Saul as their king, and God went along with it, at least at the start. The Bible tells us that Saul did fight the people's battles, and he had many military victories, but ultimately his kingdom did not last. His kingdom did not last because we are told he did not place his trust in God. And in our reading today, we heard that the Lord was sorry in consenting to make Saul king. In some translations, it is God regretted, or even God repented making Saul king. And so God withdrew the divine favor from him. There would be a new king, and this time it would be God's choice. It would be by God's criteria that a new ruler would be anointed. So God instructs the prophet Samuel to find a man named Jesse in the town of Bethlehem, by all worldly accounts a nobody from an unremarkable family in a backwater corner of the nation. But Samuel does what he is told, and as instructed, he lines up the 7 sons that Jesse brings forth, and he inspects the oldest son, Eliab, who is fine and strong and tall, very Saul-like. And Samuel thinks to himself, I see what the Lord is doing here. Surely this is the one. And God says, no, not him. And then the second son, Abinadab, comes forth, also a strapping lad, a fine candidate in Samuel's eyes, but God says, no, not him either. 7 times this happens, and 7 times the Lord says, no, not him. Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, for the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. The Lord looks on the heart. Confused and seemingly out of candidates, Samuel asked Jesse, are all of your sons here? Well, no, Jesse replies. I suppose there's David. He's out back keeping the sheep. It was obvious that David's family considered him least worthy, if they considered him at all. The youngest, the smallest, the seemingly least important or impressive, they didn't even think of him, let alone call him to present himself to Samuel. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Called forth from the field, the Lord then gazed upon the heart of the 8th child and said, rise and anoint him, for this is the one. David was young and small, the seemingly least impressive member of an otherwise unremarkable family from Bethlehem, a place where nobody thought anything important could ever happen. But this David, the least, the one left behind, was the one anointed as king. And with God's blessing upon him, he grew in strength and wisdom and ended up being a great king, a powerful warrior, poet who forged an identity for the nation. Now, David was undoubtedly a great king. But when we read his story in the Old Testament, it is obvious that he was very, very, very far from being a perfect person. Yes, he did great things, but he was also ruthless. He played politics. He wielded his power in wildly abusive and destructive ways. He was profoundly complicated and conflicted. As the historian Abram Leon Sacker puts it, David played exquisitely, fought heroically, and loved titanically. He was both cheerful and despondent, selfish and generous, sinning one moment and repenting the next. Indeed, Sackar says that David was the most human character of the Bible. David was the king, and he was also very, very human, with all the faults and failures that come with that, and he knew it. He knew it. Have mercy on me, O God, he cries out in Psalm 51, for I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. David fought in many military battles on behalf of his people, but the most brutal battles, the ones that really left their mark, were the internal battles. Those battles with the unhealthy passions that would flame up within him. The battles of conflicting interests from competing voices. The battles of ethics and morality and justice in complicated situations that rarely had straightforward solutions. Perhaps in David's story we can see our own struggles in those times when it feels like we are being pulled in every direction all at once. David was far from perfect, And he had to battle every day of his life, and that I believe is why the Lord chose him. That is what God saw in his heart, the willingness to wrestle with hard things. The willingness to wrestle with hard things and his self-awareness to recognize his sins and transgressions when he made them, and also his strength to keep moving forward with trust in the mercy of God and to keep faith that when things got hard, God would not abandon him, but guide him on the paths of righteousness. Now, if we knew a bit of biblical Hebrew, we could probably have guessed that God was going to choose the 8th child to be king, that God would go outside the margins of completion or perfection, because in Hebrew, David's name literally means beloved. David is not perfect. He is a work in progress, and because of this, he is beloved. The Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. We don't need to be tall or rich or conventionally beautiful or from a powerful family or educated at the right schools or particularly accomplished in business or politics or any other worldly criteria. And as humans, we will never be without fault or failure. But when God looks on our heart, a heart looking back to God, is what is needed to receive divine blessing. When God looks on our heart, an open and humble and trusting heart, looking back to God is all that is needed to be anointed as God's beloved. The Jewish rabbi and theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel says that the Bible speaks not only of man's search for God, but also of God's search for man. It is as if God is unwilling to be alone, and he has chosen human beings to love and serve him. None of us will ever be anointed king, but we can each dedicate ourselves to love and serve God, and in so doing, receive the blessing to love and serve in God's name. Even in our smallness, we can make a huge impact in the lives of others, our families, our places of work, our church. Even in our imperfection, we can participate in God's perfect intentions towards goodness and truth and beauty. It is the supreme cop-out to seek out the strong man to fight our battles for us. That path only ever leads to tyranny. No, with God's help and the support of each other, we can navigate those battles that we all fight each day, those internal battles with the unhealthy impulses that we all struggle with, that if we do not battle against, they will manifest in unhealthy ways, not just for us, but for others around us. God anointed the imperfect 8th child because David was willing to wrestle with hard things. In our imperfection, we are anointed as the beloved when God finds within us an open, humble, and trusting heart, willing to admit when we fail, willing to be a work in progress, and the strength to move forward with trust in the mercy of God, and to keep faith that when things get hard, and they do get hard, God does not abandon us. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. The Lord looks on the heart. Friends, open your hearts and receive the blessing of the Lord. Open your hearts and see that you are anointed to love and serve in the name of the Lord. Open your hearts and know that you are beloved. Open your hearts and know that you are a beloved child of the living God. And this is simply perfect. Praise and glory be to God.